Did Paul have a concern for the poverty that was all around him in the Greco-Roman world? Traditionally, this question hasn't even been asked. In the last generation or so, people have been asking it. And more the answer is, yes, he did. He imagined that his gospel had relevance to the poverty that was all around him, and that Christian communities were places where caring for the poor was happening in real terms. One passage that's important in this regard is 2 Corinthians 9:13, where Paul is talking about the collection that he's collecting on behalf of the Jerusalem Christians. But he talks there about the generosity of the Corinthians. And he talks about their generosity in sharing with them, the Jerusalem Christians, and with everyone else, as if generosity was a habit that was being formed even within the Christian communities in Corinth, more generally, not simply in relation to the collection for the Jerusalem Christians. So here are Christian groups who are beginning to be known for generosity for others around them, generosity towards others around them. That's a real window into what early Christian life looked like, because Paul doesn't elaborate the point, he takes it as a given that this is what's happening in Christian communities. And when we read in other places in Paul's letters about doing good to others, both within the Christian community and beyond, that's not necessarily an exclusively economic term, do good to others who are in financial straits, but it would certainly include an economic dimension. Do good to those who are in need, caring for the needs of others. In the ancient world, the needs of others was primarily economic. Might also be emotional, tragedies, traumas, etc. So that's a broad gamut of things that Paul's talking about, perhaps, but it doesn't exclude the economic, and it would look very awkward if we imagine that it did. And so when we turn to a passage like Galatians 2:10, it's very instructive to read what's going on there. Paul has met with the Jerusalem leadership, along with Barnabas, and they're discussing what are the identity markers for Christian communities throughout the Mediterranean basin. Are we going to require faith in Christ to include also circumcision so that every Christian community looks the same? And the early Christian leaders said, no, some communities will look like this with regard to circumcision and others will look like this. We'll have different habits according to different membership. But what they did say was, what they agreed on is that the poor should be remembered. It's a term that seems to refer to gestures of care for the poor. And this is something that they stipulated with regard to Paul's mission in particular. Peter is going to the Jews with the mission of spreading the gospel, and Paul is going primarily to the Gentile world with the mission of spreading the gospel among them. And so when Paul is advised to make sure that Gentile communities remember the poor, this is because the Gentile world was not known particularly, especially among Jews, for beneficial initiatives among the poor. This is something that Jews had within their traditions and within their scriptures, and it was inbuilt within the Jewish communities, long had been for many generations. And so this sort of advice did not need to be given to Peter going to the Jewish world, because it was assumed that the Jews would be remembering the poor. But when Paul's going to the Gentile world, it's stipulated that Gentiles should join in this initiative, so that Christian communities, no matter where they are, no matter what their constituency, will be marked out by and identified by this common character of remembering the poor. So this is, in a sense, our very first ecclesial meeting, our first church council, about what Christian identity looks like. And they stipulated that it that Christian identity needs to be common in certain regards. Faith in Christ is assumed, but not in other regards, circumcision. But one thing that will mark out Christian community in every sector is care for the poor.